So let's get started. I am Tracy Dallas. I'm a senior consultant with Implementation Specialist. I've been with the company for about 4 months, and I did a very similar webinar at our GPUC conference, but I'm going to do a couple little things different here. The thing with GP tips and tricks is that there are just so many things. We have a very robust feature set within Great Plains, and so there are a lot of features that people either forgot about or maybe they don't do on a day-to-day basis, or they never knew them. So hopefully I will give you some new things to look at. I will do some things from my GP install, which is GP 18, or now just Dynamics GP. My topics will be system navigation. We'll go through the home page, and then we'll also dig into user preferences, some window navigation, things like that. Then we'll focus just on a transactional basis on general ledger entries. We'll talk a little bit about property tracking, and then my last more tips and tricks is kind of a hodgepodge of different things that I particularly like and things that I've used in the past. So with system navigation, we of course talk about our splash screen as soon as we enter GP, our home page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my GP right here. And my home page, as me logged in as SA, is very clean. The only thing that I have showing is quick links. Your home page may look very different. I use the link to customize this page in order to get rid of the sections that I didn't necessarily want. There are several sections available: the to-do list, the quick links, the connect, and then if you're using time management or any of the self-service project related or payroll related items, you have those tiles. And then you also might show my reports. But for me, I just unchecked what I didn't necessarily need to see. And that just left me with my quick links. And when I click the details, this is where I can choose which links I want to add to my quick links. So again, I'm logged in as an SA, so everything that you see here is really related to maintaining GP. But if I wanted to add something that I use on a frequent basis, I can click the add button, and then I can choose whichever window I want to add. So maybe there's something that I do from a transactional perspective that I do often enough that I want to go ahead and add it to my quick link. So I'm in this case going to use my journal entry, and I'm going to add that here. Now I can also modify these names. If I click this and click the modify button, maybe general isn't enough information for me. I want to say journal entry instead. So I can actually change that and then save it. So that's how I see it now. All right. So I'll click OK and OK. And now it is available on my quick links. Now I also had the ability in that window to either move things up or down. I could have rearranged any of these things as well. So for me, I've been in the GP world for about 20 odd years at this point. And, before this navigation pane, everything was using the drill down. So you would come into transactions, financial, all of that. But when the navigation panes came out, I found them very helpful to me. So what I can do is I can expand so I can see everything that might be installed on my installation. So in this case, I have things like projects. So if I know I'm doing a lot of work in project, I just click this navigation pane, and that gives me access to all of the various things that I might be using. Likewise with HR and payroll, if I click the navigation pane, then I can choose whatever I need. If I'm going to be spending most of my day in payroll, rather than having to keep going back and forth to transactions, payroll, or anything like that. Also, with the navigation panes, if you notice, the options here at the top, these shortcuts change based on the navigation pane selected. So for an example, payroll posting accounts is available on the HR and payroll pane. Inventory has different items available to it, so they change with each navigation pane. But you can add anything to these that you need just with the right click of a button or just adding in the shortcut. A lot of people like to do it through the actual window. So if they're in a transaction, for example, let's say I go into general journal entry and I want to add this, I can add it this way and add it to my shortcuts right here. Now, if you notice, I clicked out. My pane is shorter, right? I don't necessarily like the big buttons that come with the regular version of the product. This is something that's changed within the user preferences. So if I come here to user preferences, you'll see this item called Windows Command Display. Menu bar is the classic version of GP. So what it looked like back in, the GP 2010 days, where it really was just the menu bar. Or I can have the action pane itself. So those are the big buttons and the things that you would normally see in a Microsoft product, like if you're in Word or if you're using Outlook, you see the big buttons. I prefer the strip because it gives me a little bit more room. It doesn't take up as much real estate, if you will. So I have the shorter panes. So this is how you can change that. Other things to think about within the user preferences. If you typically, like me, I don't really print a lot of documents. So my default report destination is screen. I can set that here. And if I'm using something like SOP, and maybe I don't normally do orders, maybe my SOP, my sales order processing, I'm really only doing either invoices or returns, I can make this my default sales document type as well. On the password, now I'm logged in as SA, so therefore you can't see it. This is typically what people normally see and how they normally come in and change their passwords. Last thing is the entry key. So for me, I prefer to use tab, but there are several people that prefer to use the return key to jump from field to field. My preference, of course, is tab. Other things within the user preferences window are reminders and then the display. So if I want to, in this case, I want to make my required fields a different color, I can do that so that when I'm in a transaction, I can easily see what field needs to be complete before this transaction is considered okay to save. So what I did was I made my font color red so that it stood out, and then I also bolded it. If I wanted to, I could italicize it. When I apply the change, you can see it right away what it'll look like. But you can do this with your regular fields too, as far as the link. So if, for example, I am trying to jump back to my GL account when I'm in my transactions window, I would click the link. If I wanted that to stand out a little bit more, there are different colors, and some of them are kind of out there. So we'll play with that a little bit. That green is kind of bright, but if that is your thing, absolutely, we can use that. And then teal, turquoise, all of those colors. So I typically go with the darker color and make it easy to see. I can also choose to underline it or just leave it regular. In this case, I have my link underlined. So if you're not familiar with this, this is something that you could do. And again, this is just for your user. So I will click OK. Lastly, if you're using human resources, there are other things within the human resources in the user preferences. So that if you wanted to open the HR to-do list or the personal to-do list, you could set those here as well. All right. Now for my different items of navigation, let me show you a couple different things here. So I'm going to go into, I'll go into the account card. Give you some ideas here. So when I'm looking up an account, and I click that lookup window, this opens up something that we call advanced lookup window. And within the advanced lookup window, I have different options. Now you might be familiar already with the ability to change the header. So if I don't know, for example, the account number, but I do know the description. I can type it in here, just the first few letters, and then it's going to give me that list in description order. Now, what I can also do, if you can see there's a little dark arrow right here, I can also do other additional sorts. So if I want to look at something up by maybe a main segment or something like that, I could do that as well. And I click it, and now I'm just looking for the 4-digit number in this case. So it's going to take me there. Likewise, I have a custom sort capability. So maybe, and I know that for some examples, we've had a user defined where maybe I changed my account. I had a different chart of accounts. And so I put the old account number in user defined. So I can then use my user defined search and click it here. So if I know what that old account number is, I can just type it in. So I have many more options besides the account number in the description. So the advanced lookups windows, anytime you see windows that look like this, this is for the vendors, for customers, all of those things that is available to you. So make sure that you use that. While I'm in this window, I want to also, I guess I'll kind of jump to the GL a little bit. I wanted to remind people, if you don't know what this checkbox is, this is called the allow account entry. This is for controlling accounts. Typically, people use this for, we'll call it accounts payable or accounts receivable. All right, so let me type this in. So if on my accounts payable account, I only want transactions to come from the submodule, meaning that I only want those invoices, those vouchers, those checks, everything like that. They're the only things that I want to hit this account. I don't want anyone to be able to enter a journal entry in this account. All I have to do is uncheck this box, and it'll disallow any user from just going in and creating a journal entry for that account. But it will still allow the accounts payable module to send all the transactions through. Just wanted to make sure you knew about that. Other items in general ledger, and I'll walk you through here. We're going to talk about the copy paste function, reversing, correcting entries, copying entries, and I've already given you the allow account entry, but then we'll also talk about the reverse year end as well. So I'm going to come back here to my window. So I have a journal entry up. And for this particular entry, if I wanted to, I can make a copy of this. If this represents something that I'm going to do on a regular basis, or just for this time, maybe it's something that's not necessarily periodic, like you would use, say, a recurring batch for, but it is something that, okay, yeah, I need to make a copy of this. I can choose, and I can say, all right, I need to make a copy of, and it'll show me which years. So I'm going to select a transaction from 2018. And then when I do that, it'll show me everything. So I can choose to make a copy of an entry very simply. One more thing I didn't show you yet on the, before I leave the main window, I wanted to talk about this button down here. So when I'm in my GP, and of course it's going to always, when I log in, give me the system date. I'm using the Fabricam company right now, and that system date is set for 4/12/2027. So if I need to make a change to that, I'm going to just change it to today's date and click OK. Then it's going to change everything else, so I can get back to my normal date. To me, this is important when you're doing things in arrears. So let's say I am doing some things in for year end, for example, and I want to make sure that I'm posting to December 31st. What you can do here is you just make sure you have the date changed here to December 31st. And so then when you're creating any of those transactions, they'll automatically come up with that date for you, so you don't have to go back and forth and change it over and over again. Likewise, down here, I can click the company name in order to switch out my companies. So if you are still logging out of GP and logging back in to switch companies, Don't do that. Just go ahead and click this button and any companies that you have will be visible. And then if you do have multiple companies, but maybe you predominantly use one, you can choose to click this Remember This Company button. That way you don't have to, when you log in all the time, choose the company. It'll automatically go to that company for you, just as a reminder. And as soon as you do that, it's going to take you all the way back. So I'm going to reset my user date again for today's date. All right. So in my financial, for my general ledger entry, I'm going to click here. Now, when I click this maximize multi-column mode, it throws my transactions over to the main pane. So all of my other panes are stacked, if you see, to the right. I can choose to stack them to the left or underneath. But I'm going to focus on transactions for a little bit. So when I come here, I can do that. So now if you notice, my transaction date is today's date. So I don't know if you knew this or not. So let's say I want to be able to jump up and down in dates. So maybe I need to do yesterday's date. I don't have to type that date all the way through. I can just hit the minus button and it will decrement for me. Likewise, I can hit the plus button and it'll increase for me. And even better, if I want to post something on the 15th, I don't have to type in the whole 1/5 or the whole date. I can actually type in the 15th like this. So I just typed in the 1/5 instead of the whole digits, right? So that's something that I don't know if you knew about. I'm going to change this to a 2017 or 2018 date here. There we go. Here on my I guess we'll call them the sideways double chevrons, is where I have the ability to copy the entry as you saw. My correcting entry is where I can choose an entry and either make a complete reversal of it, or I can do a reverse and correct transaction. So if I choose that, I'm gonna go ahead and delete my transaction here. I can choose to either back out a journal entry or I can back it out and create a correcting entry. So once I decide which one I want to do, in this case, I don't want the entry at all. I just want it to go away. I would select back out. If I do then want the entry and I want it to create something right after, maybe it's just something simple like I have to change the dollar amounts. I don't necessarily have to change the accounts. I can make that change here. So if I do this, then it'll ask me, okay, well, what year are we talking about? And then I can actually select the entry that I want to change. Now, if it, in this case, I'll get, if it's done in the submodule, it'll let me know I can't correct anything in payroll. This will only correct anything that is general ledger based, all right? If you're already using this, and I know some people do, some people don't, you can create journal entries in Excel. All you need are 4 columns, which are the description, the account, debit, and credit. So if you have those 4 columns in an Excel spreadsheet, then you can come here to your entry, then you make your comment here, and then you click down here, then you go to Excel, you copy, you paste, you do the copy in Excel, and then you do the paste here, and then it'll fill in the general ledger entries for you. All right. The last thing before we leave the GL I want to talk about is the year-end close. And I'm going to pull up both of these. So we have the fixed assets year-end close, and then we have the GL year-end close. So for fixed assets, what is new, and it happened probably 2 versions ago, it creates an actual journal entry. So basically a ledger, if you will, of your actual year-end balances. So I always recommend that when you do your fiscal year end close for your assets, that you go ahead and print the document. Once you hit the continue button, it'll actually create those for you. And as a reminder, even though only the internal is depreciating, if you have other books, you want to make sure that you have those closed equally and at the same time, because you just never know when you have to go into them. So if you have more than one book, always close all your books at the same time. So for the GL year-end closing, you have the ability to do a couple of different things. If you have, in this case, I use a system that has 3 segments. And if there are any segments, any individual segment that during the process of closing, GP says, oh, this hasn't been used for a while, you have the option to allow GP to remove it by clicking this checkbox. If you leave it unchecked, it will not remove any of those unused segment numbers. Now, the flip side is any inactive account. So now I'm talking about the whole string. So if in this string, there are some inactive accounts, I can choose to keep them, because right now, by this button being unchecked, GP will automatically delete any inactive accounts that don't have any balances. But maybe it's just like maybe I'm setting up something for a new company and we just haven't posted any entries yet, and that's why it's inactive. I will use them eventually, but I'm just not using them right now. I wouldn't recommend that you go ahead and click the checkbox to maintain any inactive accounts. And then you can choose to only keep them if they have budget amounts, or you can choose to do all inactive accounts. Now, if you notice, I last closed on 12/31/2017. Now, if in this case, I need to reverse something, maybe it's April and the auditors have come up with another entry, and they really want it closed and properly booked to GP, I have a couple of options to do that. If it's a short entry, I can just go into my general ledger setup, and I can temporarily allow posting to history. Maybe it's just 3 or 4 accounts. If I check this box and then say okay, then I can go to the journal entry. I can put down the appropriate journal date and post it, and it'll create the close on its own, right? So it will, if it's profit and loss, it will go ahead and create that closing entry and throw that over to retained earnings. If it is a balance sheet, then of course it'll just maintain the balance sheet account. But it's controlled by this checkbox. I always leave this unchecked all the time and only use it if, in fact, I have a short entry to post. Now, let's say I have a very long entry, or maybe there's just some issues, or maybe there's a merger and an acquisition. I have another option, which is to reverse my year end. So instead, I can come here and I can do the year end closing, and I need to make significant changes. I can reverse my historical year by clicking this button, and it'll just double check it before it processes that this is the year I want to reopen. I click the process button, and as if I had never made the closing. So then I will go ahead and make whatever entries I need to make, and then I can come back and close again. And again, that's if you have several changes to make, or maybe several changes over a course of time. That maybe you closed a little bit too early. There are some things that need to be done. All right. So I know I have you muted, but if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat line. My next topic is going to be property tracking. I opened the fixed asset window for you ahead of time, but I just want to kind of talk through a couple of things as they relate to fixed assets. I know that sometimes smaller companies or even companies that don't have a lot of assets, they keep the assets on an Excel spreadsheet, and then once, twice a year, they let the accountants handle it. Well, GP has this free module. Basically, if you're on any version 20, I want to say 2010 and higher, fixed assets is available to you and it's free to use. So you can absolutely use it and store your assets as well. Likewise, there's property tracking. So if you have the HR module, same thing, you can actually store information on your employees, so you can keep track of it like that as opposed to doing it in any type of Excel spreadsheet. Any questions that you have, please feel free to ask. I know that we're about to run out of time. I have a couple minutes left. So if you have any questions in the chat window, please put them up at this time. And there's one other thing I wanted to bring up as well. You know, when it comes to tips and tricks, a lot of different VARs have done different things and it's stored in many different ways. If you type in something very simple like Dynamics GP tips and tricks, you have the ability to see different things. So there are a lot of different resellers, different companies, even Microsoft themselves, that give you lists and lists and lists of their favorite tips and tricks. So uh, I'm looking probably at about 5 different software vendors, Encore Business. So they have different tips. Likewise, the Dynamics Compute community also has tips and tricks. So if you like learning different things about GP and time-saving efforts and all of those things, definitely just Google it. We make ours available, of course, in our webinars, but likewise, you can always come here and Google to get additional tips and tricks. The last thing I want to leave you with is one of my favorite things, which is the Professional Services Tools Library. So if you don't have this installed, it's something that's very helpful. And the very first time you click it, it'll do this really quick check of the objects, and then it'll put up the main window. And in the main window, you have the ability to do things like the inventory reconcile. So if you're using inventory, for example, the reconcile here in the Professional Services Tools Library is much faster than the one that's just in GP. If you go to GP Routines Inventory, there's a reconcile function there. But I recommend using this one if you have to do any type of inventory reconciliation. This is a good one to use. All right, I'm looking and it looks like we don't have any other questions so far. I'm looking at the chat window. But here is the Professional Services Tools Library window. So what I was just mentioning, the item reconciler. Likewise, like we have with vendor naming and combining and customer modifying, combining, you also have item numbers that can be combined and item descriptions that can be combined and inventory sites. So if you need to change the name or change a location, all of these things are available in the Professional Services Tools Library, as is a checkbook modifier and a fixed assets modifier. All right. Well, this is all I have. I thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to implementation specialists, either through our support line or give us a call. This webinar will be available on YouTube as well as our website. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you so much.